All right, hello. I don't have very many slides, and they are not decorated in any way, but let's hope the topic is nonetheless interesting. And I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, though. I'm talking about Cynefin. Just look at the spelling if you want to Google it later. That's more important when you're writing it. And Cynefin is a framework for making sense of the situation that you are in. It sounds a bit abstract. I don't know how would I put it, but I would say that the point is that don't always use the same approach when you are dealing with a problem or you are working on something, but rather take into consideration the context that you are in and the system outside of you that you are working in, and let that influence your decisions how to work, rather than always do the same thing, disregarding what you are doing. So let your situation be the main factor of choosing how to work with the situation. And this doesn't only apply to software, so it has lots of applications also outside of software, but I feel that it's a big thing in software and something that is a bit often neglected even still. Every company is doing agile in one way or another, and pretty much every company is using Scrum. But in many cases, I think that Scrum is just a process that is replacing the old process. And with this talk, I would want to motivate you to see the big picture a bit more, not just to take in new practices and take in a new process or new terms for the old process or anything like that, but rather to see a bit beyond the daily stand-ups and beyond the planning poker, for example, and try to understand why are these things done and what is the meaning of those things. Why do we want to do that? So let's see if I achieve that target or not, but let's get started. So the next one is my last slide. And this was the best I found, although I think it has some mistakes and some things lack here, but let's go with this one. So with Cynefin, when you try to make sense of your situation, you have some domains where you can place yourself. What kind of a world am I in right now? So there are these 4 different corners of the picture: obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And then in the middle, where there is the red area, they haven't written it, but there should be disorder. So that is the fifth domain. And all of these domains have their own characteristics and their own ways to approach dealing with any kind of a work task in that domain. So I'll quickly go through all of them, and then I'll try to reflect it on software development a bit, and then we can discuss it. So let's start with the simplest one and go to more complicated ones. So the obvious in the bottom right is the simplest domain of work. And it says they're good practice, but it should say best practice as far as I know. And in the obvious domain, that's the only place where actually you can use something called a best practice, although you hear the term a lot, but it only applies when the thing that you are doing is obvious. And what are then obvious things? They are things that any normal person can do when given instructions how to do that. So you don't need an educated person, you don't need an experienced person, you just need a person who can follow instructions, and these instructions are thought out beforehand by some sort of a, let's say, manager or whoever, and it always goes in the same way. When you get certain input, you do things always the same way, and you get to the output that was expected of you. So let's say that if you are working in a grocery store and you get a shipment from Ville, I don't know how it works exactly, but they have different kinds of products. They have butter, they have milk, they have cheese, whatever. So when you go into that truck, you find that there's a box of cheese. You know what to do with that. When you get a box of yogurts, you also know what to do with that beforehand. Your manager has told you that when a shipment of yogurt comes, you place it here. And then after that, you put some tick to some paper that, okay, shipment accepted, and sign some paper or whatever. It always goes in the same way. And if there are some changes, first you update the instructions, somebody thoughts about it through, updates the instructions, and then the workers just follow instructions. So that's in a way simple. No education needed, very kind of straightforward. And you know everything that is going to happen. That's the key thing here. So it says that there are known knowns. So everything is kind of predictable. You can use categories, like cheese is different from milk, so do different things when you get these things. Then if we move one box up, you get to complicated. That is something that is quite similar to obvious. The key difference is that you need a trained professional to do the work. So the method of working is still pretty much the same, except that instead of somebody else analyzing the situation beforehand, the expert analyzes it at hand when the work is started. So let's say that if you are building a house, some things you might be able to do yourself, but with some things you probably want to consult an expert to do some kind of a plan for you. Let's say that if you are able to get all the walls up and all the ceilings done and so on, and then you want to get electricity, then that might be something that you don't want to do yourself, but you want to hire a professional. And what this professional will do, it will plan it, it will see through your architecture diagrams, it will make a plan where to pull all the cords, where to put the switches, where to put the fuses. And then when an experienced professional has done a plan, then after that you just execute the plan and you probably will get a decent result. So instead of categorizing, we analyze. And beforehand, we know what kind of unknowns and what kind of problems we might get into when we are dealing with this issue. And like I said, not anyone can do that. You need experience and knowledge. Then when we get to complex, one step to the left, the change is a bit more dramatic from the two previous ones. So when you are in complex, you don't even know what kind of problems you might get. And in here, even the best experts cannot analyze beforehand what is the way to go, what to do, what are the steps to get to the result that we want to get to. Let's say that one topic that has been up during the recent years is this economic downturn. In Finland, it was a bit longer than in some other countries. Now they say that we are doing better. And when you try to get to this state that you are starting to do better again, you hear lots of different opinions. People have their own recipes. And one of the things that is often done is that the central banks try to do something with the interest, and then the private, smaller banks follow what they do. And then they do something, and then they see the market's reaction. If the market reacted in a way that is positive for the economy, then they try to go to the same direction little by little. So if they lowered the interest, maybe they lower a bit more and then see what happens. If the action that they took the economy to a worse direction, then they might do the opposite action. So they might, instead of lowering the interest, they might increase it and try that for a change and see what happens. So in here, what needs to be done is to try something, which says here that probe, and then see what happens with this kind of an experiment. And if that experiment leads you to a good direction, then you do more of similar experiments. And if it leads you to a bad direction, then you try something else, something different. And in here, it's enough that you have some kind of a plan that what if this experiment fails, what to do? What if this experiment succeeds, what to do next? You don't have to have a plan too much further than that, but you need to understand that, okay, what is a sensible experiment to make? And then you need to know beforehand that what to do with that experiment in those two different paths. But trying to see the situation too much further doesn't make sense because there are unknowns. You will just fool yourself by thinking that I am smart enough, I can create a 5-year plan how to deal with the world's economic crisis, and then everybody just follows. So you know that they don't do it like that. So they try. They might sometimes try. Then if we move on to the next box, or the last box here, this chaotic. For me, this is maybe the least interesting of these. And that's, let's say, even more kind of complex than complex. So you can't even know all the things that might happen. It says they're unknowable unknowns, which I think is a good way to put it. And well, chaotic situation, I guess everyone can imagine. Let's say some terrorist attacks that we have had recently, a bit too many. It's very hard to say what to do in those situations beforehand. And the most important thing is to try to act and do something that would take you out of the chaos. But otherwise, it's a bit similar. You need the feedback loops. But instead of probing, it's kind of more stronger thing to, just to act. You cannot do kind of a contained experiment where you have some plan what to do if it fails or succeeds, but you just need to do something very quickly and then try to get feedback of what you did and see where it takes you and try to get out of the chaos. So that's one also important thing here, that you don't stay, it's not like when you are dealing with, let's say, things that happen in the grocery store. It's not like you are always in obvious every time, all the time. But you can also move from one domain to another. And in that area that you work in, there can be problems that are in multiple places. Like one thing can be a complex thing, and another is complicated. And you would need to understand where you are, and that will tell you how to approach the situation. And that same situation can change when you learn from it. It can go from complex to complicated. When you have done some experiments, you have learned a bit, then you start to understand that okay, maybe I can analyze this issue, and then it has become complicated rather than complex. So moving around is very normal, that happens. But mostly when you move, you should try to stay in the complex and complicated in most issues that we are dealing with. That if you are trying to move things too much to the obvious, then that is something that is dangerous, because then you are telling the other people around you that are working with the issue that, I know exactly what to do, I have written it down in the paper, so you don't just execute. So that is always dangerous. Then you lose all the feedback loops, then you lose all the analysis. You simplify things too much that might not be simple after all. And that can lead to bad things. The disorder thing in the middle, that just basically means that you don't know where you are. You think that you are in some corner of this diagram, but you actually are in a different place, so that's called disorder. And how to apply this in software? If you're doing a very small project, I would say that you are all the time in a complicated zone. Let's say that you are doing some fairly simple, let's say, game. Everybody knows, let's say this worm game that is eating things on the screen and growing. You understand what you need to do. You can even pretty much imagine the steps, how you need to do that, and it might take you from, I don't know, a couple of days to maximum a couple of weeks to get it done. And you can kind of really imagine it all in your head. The requirements are clear. You have seen this game beforehand, you have even played it, so you know very well what to do. You just need an expert to do the analysis and then the implementation. You can kind of create a plan and follow it. But in most cases where we are working with our real projects, we are dealing with big software systems. And we are dealing with business people. And business people sometimes might tend to think that they know what is it that they want. And of course, to some degree, they do know. But they also change their opinion often during the project. They also learn during the project that maybe this wasn't so important after all, but rather this other thing is much more important that we didn't even think about a week ago. So then definitely you are in the complex domain. And you should, together with the developers and business, constantly create these feedback loops. You should try small experiments, see together what the result was, and then respond accordingly. That was this result as expected? Do I do I get value of this thing? Was this a good thing? And then if it was, then we try to build on top of that more. If we did something wrong, then we try to build something else the next time. One way, if you reflect this to Scrum, is that let's say that the whole project is kind of complex, the whole product that you are developing. But then one sprint could be something that is rather complicated than complex. It probably depends on the team and depends on how much you want to do this analysis, or in Scrum planning, estimation, stuff like that. That maybe, a 2-week sprint, you can analyze beforehand and you can kind of define what is it that we are going to do, and then we are able to do that in that 2 weeks using expert knowledge. But to approach the whole product development in that sense is not something that works. It is complex, but like I said, a sprint can be complicated, or sometimes complex. It depends on what we're dealing with, in my opinion. Sometimes even 2 weeks is too long to understand anything of what you are doing during those 2 weeks. And about best practices, I didn't maybe mention it other than in the beginning. In obvious best practice, complicated good practice, meaning that there are several different good ways to do that. Not just single one that everybody has to follow, but lots of good ones that you can choose from. In complex emergent practice, meaning that when you are building the thing or doing whatever you are doing, then during this journey you learn things, and these learnings can become little by little practices for your team. You notice that with this particular domain, with these particular tasks, it is a good thing to do it like this. But it's hard to tell beforehand. You need to go on the journey and start learning to figure these things out. These kinds of practices or solutions are only obvious on hindsight. So it might seem that, of course we had to do it like this. Why didn't we figure it out a month ago? But you shouldn't think like this. It's not that you are stupid. It's just that you have to learn and iterate to get to this clarity. And in chaotic, you have completely new practices, not kind of maybe even anyhow repeatable or little by little emerging, but something novel. Is my time up? Maybe.
We have reserved this until 5, so.
I'm here till 10.
So it's not up. Yeah, you were saying that oftentimes in software we're dealing with complicated and maybe complex. I find that we're usually dealing with either obvious and complicated. Doing some mapping, like why the hell do you do this manually? And then when you push to production, you immediately move into chaos. You got emails, phone calls, everything's coming.
Yeah, that's one way to see it.
Just today.
Yeah. Transitions. Yeah, so go ahead with the questions.
Maybe a different question.
Yeah, Andy.
So how do you know which of the zones you're in?
That's a good...
Default to chaos.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess you need to kind of learn that also with time. So until you know what you are dealing with, maybe you should assume that you are in complex. Maybe that's a kind of safe starting point.
Maybe that by the degree of learning that you have to do, it seems to me. So if it's obvious, you don't have to learn anything. If it's complicated, you have to learn a little bit. But you kind of know all the domain. If you are complex, you have to learn quite a lot. And in chaotic, you have to learn everything. So maybe that might be fine.
I have seen also one nice picture. I think it was Sami Honkonen who has actually presented this thing also. He had like a bicycle in obvious, then there was a Ferrari in complicated, and then you have an organism in complex, and in the last one chaotic was like fire. Like fire meaning like the house is fire, just get out of here.
Yeah.
That could probably help a bit like finding out, are you trying Ferrari or bicycle or what it feels like.
Yeah, and like I said, that you often should try to deal with things that are in complex and complicated. That if you start from that, and then when you are really sure that this part of the thing is really obvious, like let's say that every time we deploy, the customer wants test results in an email in a certain way. We have learned that okay, it's always the same. We have to send these test results of our automated tests by email to this address every time we deploy. So that is something that pretty much then everybody can do who understands how to use the email and know how to put the text there. And then in software, that is often something that then is also automated. So you don't really spend or put people on working with obvious things, but you automate them. The machine sends the email. But then when you are doing some creative work, it's never obvious. So you are always in either complicated or complex, and then you just need to try to figure out do I have unknown unknowns, or is it something that I can really analyze and be kind of confident that my analysis will be correct in the end?
One thing I also, if you think about really big traditional, let's say, industrial companies, they want to sort of get this whole digitalization going on. Isn't that kind of like moving from the complicated towards complex a lot of times? Because a lot of times they will introduce customers, for example, and they don't really know how the customers respond to some new service that they are creating. So that's actually one challenge I feel like within organizations, trying to make them understand this model.
Yeah.
Because they're used to the whole best practices or obvious ways of doing things. So maybe introducing these ideas to the inside there, it might help them to understand why we are probing and sensing and responding.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that at least what I read about this digitalization is that in many places you have these, let's say, paper forms. And then the first step of digitalization is that they create PDFs, of the exact same thing and put it online somewhere. So that is not really understanding the complexity. Yes, that is not taking all the things that you can take. You kind of, then you just deal with obvious and complicated. You just want to repeat the same exact thing, but do it with a computer. So that's maybe not the right way to see it.
How do you convince people that think software development is complicated, that it is instead in the complex instead? It's a hard question. You see what
His presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just set the house on fire and eventually, they'll backtrack.
I guess through practical examples in that project that I would be in, to point out that okay, we have this bunch of requirements, and now we have worked on this software for a month, and now we already see that some of these requirements we haven't touched at all, and then some of them have changed quite much. So maybe it doesn't make sense to do such a long pre-analysis, but rather just have a shorter set of requirements and work from there. Kind of try to do this sensing and then responding all together and point things out to them. And if they say that yeah, we used to be much better at writing requirements 10 years ago, but now we are already old and we are not so good with our heads anymore, that we write bad requirements. If they try to tell you something like that, then you can say that, well, in my opinion, it's not the problem of the person, but it's the problem of kind of working with the issue, that it's too big thing, too complex thing. No one on earth can do that. So you can just kind of bring out these opinions and just reflect on what has been happening. Although go back a bit to those past failures and try to make them see why it failed, or why we are wasting time with something. Like writing requirements up front for half a year, and then in 1 year you see that, well, okay, was it worth it?
Thanks.
Okay. I guess I was thinking about something to compare this to, and I think JavaScript framework is pretty accurate. At that point, you don't ever go into complicated. You either do the obvious things that people have done as an example inside the framework. So you do the things that you see, okay, that works like that, I'll repeat that, okay, it works. Or it's in a really complex state, it's an organism you really don't understand. You poke at it and it does something, you don't really understand how it works. Or then the house is just on fire. I mean,
yeah, if you poke. Yeah, if you poke at it and you don't understand that did this take you to a better or worse direction, then I wouldn't say that it's maybe complex. It's even worse.
Yeah, things are difficult.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks a lot. Stay around.
You're welcome.
One more question, of course we can continue the discussions. As said, we have this reserved until 5, and actually there is going to be another meetup at 6. So you can actually advertise. Yeah. Well, I have one more question about the way this is drawn. This is drawn every time the same way. And I mainly remember that there was some significance on that little thing at the bottom.
Yeah.
Kind of fold. So was it so, or?
Yeah, that's true. This I'll show it here. But this line between chaotic and obvious is different from the other lines. And this wave here tries to represent that. In some pictures it is kind of a cliff. And it means that with all these others you have kind of somewhat smooth transitions. You can move things from complex to complicated and it is still all manageable. But if you have moved things to obvious, let's say from complicated, you have created lots of processes around something, lots of instructions, guidelines. And when you have really a complex domain, but you have lots of instructions. And then when people just follow instructions, don't think, don't get the feedback, then they will fall to chaos. So that's kind of the thing, fall over the cliff.
Okay. It's kind of soft cliff.
Yeah, this is maybe not the best picture in that sense too. Yeah, but that's why it's different. That transition is not easy.
All right. Okay, let's have a small advertisement.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
So if we don't follow that.